Okay. So the big thing, the big focus that we have today is how to assign funding agencies to your cruises, right? And it's pretty straightforward for those cruises where there's only like one SME and one funding agency, but then we have different situations where we have one SME and multiple funding agencies, or we have multiple SMEs and multiple funding agencies. So we're going to go through all of it. It's pretty much the same process, but the system does a little more, or you need to do a little bit more on those more complicated situations. So first, I'm going to start sharing my screen. And here we have MFP. You guys see this, right?
Yeah.
Okay. And I got to find the right screen here. I got many in here. All right. So the first situation we're going to go over is when you have a single SME with one funding agency. So this is, I'm going to click on the cruise here, right? I just click on the cruise and it opens up this window over here on the right. And the thing we want to pay attention to is this, there are multiple tabs down here. Because the system does a lot, it's complicated, right? So there are multiple tabs down here. This is the project structure tab. And what that does is it tells the system which projects get which C days, right? So right here, we see that this project has 38 C days. And though that number basically comes from the dates or the number of days between your sale date and your next dock date, right? So that's what controls this number here. So in this case, we have a cruise, it's a single cruise with a single funding agency. So we don't need to split this up at all, right? It's Joe Montoya gets all 38 of these days. So next, we go over to the funding tab here. So it's the next one over, this button here. If we click that, that's where we can assign the load days and the unload days to the different projects. And essentially, you'll see in the future, we can assign funding days to these days. But since it's only one SME and one project, we just have 38 days and it's automatically assigned to their project. So let's go up here, and if we click funding source and you click on the funding source, we say, okay, it's going to get charged to this NSF bio, and the project is the Sargassum Blooms, and both of the load days are going to be charged to that project. And so these numbers, these 2 load days and 1 unload day, are also driven from the dates that you put into your schedule, right? So here it has a load of the 27th and you sail on the 29th. So the 27th, 28th are your load days. And then on the unload days, again, we'll assign it to a funding agency, NSF bio, because that's the funding agency for that project. And then we put that project, attach those days to that project. So that's an easy way to do a single SME with a single funding agency. So, and we want to look, the 2 key points are clicking on the cruise from the grid timeline, going to project structure, seeing how many days are there, verifying that number of days, right? And if it's not correct, then you want to change your dates a little bit. And then going over to funding, and you assign your load and unload days to the project. Sorry, to the funding source, and then also to the project. Very important, you have to click both of these buttons. Okay, any questions there? All right, moving right along. Next example, it's going to be a cruise that has one application, but multiple funding agencies, okay? So it is, which one is this? Which one is it? Bering Sea Storms, this one. So again, I click on the project, this Bering Sea Storms, click on the project. It opens this lovely window over here. And we can see project structure, 24 days. So we need to verify that's what they require at sea days. These are 24 at sea days. And then we go from there, we go to our funding, right? Funding tab, and Doug has already done this. But you can see now there's multiple funding agencies here. So when I click that drop down, you can choose between the 2 funding agencies. So the scheduler can say, oh, those one of those days is going to get charged to MG&G or it's going to get charged to ARC. And that's up to you guys to decide or work out with the funding agencies. Here for workflow, think of workflow as project. Okay, so workflow, which project are we assigning it to? Well, there's only one project on this cruise, so we're going to assign it to Bering Sea storms. And again, this one day is reflective of the dates that you have in your schedule. So if you're supposed to have 2 days in port, then you need to change your dates up on your actual cruise. Does that make sense? Go ahead.
Yeah, Alice, I'm just curious, by allowing the ship operator to control this, I mean, maybe to let us edit it if necessary, but wouldn't this be something that should be more the responsibility of the scientist? I'm just afraid that who am I to say this belongs with this and this belongs with that?
Well, you have that capability now, right? So right now you have the capability within STRS to simply say, right, there's a load day, 5 cruise days and a demo day, and there's 6 days on your project, and you have to decide how those are split up, right? So this is just going into a little bit more detail than that. Does that make sense? Hannah, you raised your hand. Do you have a better way of explaining it?
No, not a better way, but I can give an example. Again, I don't know if you're familiar with Cal Coffee, but it's a long time series. They do 4 cruises a year. They have 3 funding sources, NOAA, NSF, and ONR, and each of them are awarded different types of day, port versus op. So ONR, this is too much detail, but ONR does not add any port days to the project, just underway days, and NSF awards or allocates a certain number of port days, and NOAA gets the other ones. So it is not our decision, but we have to be able to put that information into the system for billing and tracking for the funding agencies. So it is a conversation with each group, and maybe you don't have projects like Cal Coffee, but I guess the system needs to be able to support projects like Cal
It has
Coffee.
the flexibility. Okay. Well,
Right,
thank you.
right. And that's where so much of this complexity comes from, is the needing the ability, because I can show you on this next example, the ability to do crazy stuff, right? We'll have multiple SMEs, multiple funding agencies, and we have to be able to divide the days and yada, yada, yada. So I don't know, because you're a smaller ship, Miguel, that your ships are going to have that many iterations, let's say, but we have to be able to allow that to happen. Does that make sense?
I follow you. You need the flexibility, but it just may not be so applicable to the smaller vessels or these type of.
Yep.
Okay,
And so for you
understood.
guys, if there's just one funding source, the biggest take home is to go to this funding tab and make sure that your port days are charged to who they're supposed to be charged to. Does that make sense?
Okay.
Okay, so then let's get to the granddaddy of them all, where we have multiple SMEs, so multiple projects on one cruise, and then multiple funding sources. So we're going to look at, this is a test so I can mess around with it. So again, I click on the cruise on grid timeline, it opens this nice box over here. And here we'll see, you can see there, it says grazing at Axel, and there are 2 lines underneath. That means there's 2 ancillary projects or piggyback projects to this one. On this OOI row post, we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 ancillary projects, right? So it can get pretty darn complicated. So here, this is where it gets a little trickier, I will say. We've got Julie Huber, grazing at Axel is the main project. There's 17 sea days, and again, that's just from sailing to the dock date, right? It depends on your date on your schedule. And then she's got 2 ancillary projects here, right? But right now you can see that they don't have any days assigned to them. So we're going to make this up. This is a test schedule for me. So I want to assign, I know that Alan gets 1 day and Matt gets 2 days. I'm making this up now. And so I use the pencil and I click on the pencil, and you can see this changes a little bit. And I use this arrow to say, okay, Alan gets 1 day. Very important to click this checkbox. Check. Oh, come on, okay. So now we'll see that Julie only has 16 days, right, out of the 17. And Alan has one of those, and then we're gonna say, well, Matt also needs 2 days. So I click on that pencil again, and I bump him up 2 days, and so I click the checkbox. And now we see that Julie has 14 days. Alan Chave has 1 day, and Matt has 2 days. Okay, so now we've assigned the C days. That's our first thing to do, is assign the C days to the right projects. Then we go over to funding, this funding tab again. And again, we assign those load and unload days. I will say for the most part, and Hannah, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but it's the main projects that get assigned those port days, right? So in this case, it's going to be NSF Bio, and it's going to be the grazing at Axial. So again, I click this down and I can see which funding agencies are available to me. And I can see that assign it to the correct project. Again, it's 2 days here, and these 2 days are based on the dates that are in this calendar. You can't edit it here. You have to edit it within your calendar, within the dates, I should say. And then unload again, I click that button, I choose which funding agency, and there's only one available. And I choose the project to assign it to. And then down here, as it turns out, so here we got 14 days, like I mentioned, we assigned her 14 days in the previous screen, in the project structure screen. And she is funded by NSF OCE Bio, so that's who's assigned to those days. And then we've got Alan, who's got libs on Jason, and he too is funded by OCE. He's funded by OTIC, and he gets 1 day. And then Matt Hines here, he's funded by NSF IPS, and he gets 2 days here. And so that's it. Then you're done, right? It'll save automatically. You can, let's say there's, if you wanted to split up, let's say there's 2 days here, and I wanted to split them up between 2 different organizations or 2 different projects. So I can use this plus button here, click, and you'll see another funding source comes up here. I'm a little so here we go. So we can say, okay, this time Alan is going to pay for one, and I know he's funded by OTIC, and I'm going to assign it to his project, lives on Jason. We're going to bring that down by 1 and bring that up by 1. That makes sense? So now we've got both of our port days assigned. Then we have our unload, 1 unload day assigned to the right project, and all these at sea days are assigned as they should be. So that's about all I had to show. One thing, Miguel, while you're here, another neat new feature, if you haven't had a chance to look at it, is there's a project notes section. So it should actually say schedule notes, but if you click on this, this will be your schedule notes. So if you wanted to keep track of anything, again, that's this little.
And that's more from a holistic standpoint, not for an individual cruise, but for example, you may want to make notes to yourself about why a cruise is now fewer days, or for example, my cruise that was delayed for hurricane purposes.
Right. Move schedule 3 days to the right because of hurricane issues, right?
The equivalent would have been, yes, the equivalent would have been the headers, the internal headers we would have had in STRS.
Right.
Okay.
Right. And each of your projects actually has a project note section also.
I saw that. Yeah.
So that's specific to your project, whereas this up here is actually for your schedule.
The schedule itself. Okay.
Right. Okay. And then one other note I wanted to show you, if you click stats and you click funding, it gives us our lovely, okay.
That's where that is.
But I will have to tell you that this is only as correct as the data that's in there. So I recommend you go through each of your projects, right? Assign the right port days, load days, unload days, make sure all the projects have the right funding agency, and then you can go in here and your number should be correct. Hannah, go ahead.
I must have missed it, or I'm having a brain fart, but how do you manipulate the C-Day funding? That looked like I didn't see an edit or a plus button to change that.
And there isn't if there's only one funding agency for that project.
Like OOI or crazy and axial, either of those examples that you were giving, it showed multiple funding
Right.
sources.
So.
Oh, it's the edit, it's the pencil.
Yep, so the
Okay.
pencil will change the number of C days. But this project is only funded by one, it's funded by OTIC, I think. This one is funded by IPS. And so on the C day, on the funding side, it doesn't give you any choices because it knows that this project is funded by OTIC. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that does make sense, but the quantity.
It's in project structure.
Okay,
Yep, so you use the pencil and you can up the number of days and just know that that affects, that then subtracts a day from here, right? From
Okay.
your main project.
thank you.
So the first thing to do is go in, especially if you have multiple projects on there, go into project structure, assign the proper number of Ds using the pencil and the arrows. And then once those are assigned properly, then you go into the funding and just verify that your port calls are correct. Now, if the case where Alan Cheeve was funded by two different people, you would have a choice here.
Mhm.
Okay.
Awesome. Did you, so transits are just slightly different because it doesn't automatically know which projects, and so you have to put more information into the system. Did we already go over that and I missed it?
We didn't, but that's a good call to go over it here. So here I just clicked on a transit, and here I can choose my funding agency. So I can choose institution, and you'll see it, the list drills down, Cal State and then Moss Landing, or you can, oops, cancel. So you can choose a funding source for a transit, but it isn't specifically attached to a project, which might be an oversight. We'll go with this as it is right now. So you can say, okay, this is going to be split up between NSF, OCE, and it's kind of a pain, I will say. If you go to National Science Foundation, then you go down to OCE, then you go down to bio, and then this one is NSF, National Science Foundation.
Alice, I actually think not having transits not connected to projects is better, because there could be a project 3 cruises previous to the one right before the transit that needs to pay some of that transit.
Yep, that's a good point. And that would be a great place to have some notes, right?
Mhm.
Project notes here on the transit to just explain why you did what you did, right? And so if you want to add multiple, even more funding sources, you can use the plus button again, click that plus button, select whatever funding source, BOEM, and they're going to get 1 day, but it won't let you see how the system won't let me do another day because it knows there's only 3 days in there. So I have to make that one smaller and then I can make this one bigger. And my status on this is it's funded.
And you do have to do the status on every transit funding.
That is a good
it's not
point. Very good
connected to
point.
yeah.
Yeah, so that's here. You have to say whether the status is pending, funded, declined, and withdrawn. And if you don't do that, then your numbers are not going to show up in your pretty picture over here. So all of these little details are important.
And Alice, this is just a question that is coming up now that we're talking about it. Part of the workflow, one of the things the PI needs to do is confirm funding, but I don't think, so I'll go through and look at who's going to pay for this transit and I'll put what the current funding is. But then if the PI comes in and changes the project funding from pending to funded, but I've put pending on the transit, I don't think the system's linking between those two actions.
It's not, it's definitely not, especially since it can't really because we're not assigning this to a project, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's something that's going to have to be done by hand from the schedulers, at least right now. I'm
So
sure
maybe we could attach a project manually, like we're attaching a funding source manually.
maybe, yeah. But I worry about getting that list up there. Holy cow.
I know.
Yeah, I am writing it down.
Or it's just something we go back and do when we're finalizing the schedule before the annual reports.
I think that's smart. Probably the easiest thing, because I'm sure they would take on the challenge of figuring out how to do it automatically, but wow. And I think we have some other things that are a little bit more necessary at this point, right? Yeah, yeah. But I would like to see project notes for the transits. Okay. Any other questions? Christine, you've been very quiet.
I am taking it all in right now, but I do understand the need to have basically the cruise days change so that it correlates with what you can designate for different agencies for funding. So I like that.
Okay. And just as a reminder, you can change the cruise dates by clicking just above the project, right? And you get what we call the voyage screen. And so we can change these load and unload dates here. And then once you do that, it'll be reflected on this project screen.
Awesome. Thank you.
Again, you can see from this screen, there are multiple tabs up top, so you can see the details, just some basic details. You can look at the application, right? This is their SME or their SDR. You can look at the equipment that they've requested, and this is just the portable equipment. And then the personnel planning, which we haven't gotten to yet. So there are multiple tabs here, just think of that. And then once you're on the details page, there's multiple tabs here. All right, that's all I've got.